When I built my rustic cabin resort by the lake, I thought the biggest challenge would be the weather, the wildlife, or maybe the occasional tourist who overstayed their welcome. I never imagined the true threat would come from the local Homeowners Association. The HOA had been eyeing my resort for years, insisting it didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic. They sent letters, demanded fees, and pressured me to sell out so they could repurpose the land for their own projects. One night, after I refused their latest demand, telling them a firm no, my worst nightmare unfolded. Flames engulfed my cabins. By morning, my dream was reduced to smoldering ash. Investigators quickly traced suspicious activity to people connected with the HOA. But the story didn't end with the fire. See, before the attack, I had requested copies of the HOA's financial records, a right every homeowner has. When I confronted them publicly and pulled their budget in front of the community, everything changed. Their pale faces said it all. Hidden inside those numbers was the truth. Misused funds, shady payments, and maintenance fees funneled into personal accounts. They thought they could silence me by destroying my resort. Instead, their own paperwork destroyed them.
Abuse of power within homeowners associations is an issue that has existed for as long as these organizations have been around, yet it is not always visible until someone pushes back or refuses to comply with unreasonable demands. At their best, HOAs are supposed to maintain community standards, protect property values, and ensure that shared spaces are cared for properly. However, when authority is concentrated in the hands of a small group of individuals without adequate oversight, that authority can easily shift into misuse. What begins as small overreaches, like nitpicking paint colors or threatening fines for minor landscaping choices, can escalate into much larger problems when those in charge decide they are no longer accountable to the community they represent. Abuse of power occurs when rules are enforced selectively, when fines are used as tools of punishment rather than correction, and when decisions are made to benefit a few individuals rather than the community as a whole. It is not uncommon to hear stories of HOAs using their power to intimidate homeowners, levy excessive fees, or create impossible requirements for compliance that seem designed to push certain people out. This creates a culture of fear rather than cooperation, where residents comply not out of respect for the rules, but out of fear of retaliation. The dangers of unchecked authority are especially apparent when HOAs shift from protecting the neighborhood to pursuing personal agendas. In many cases, board members are simply neighbors volunteering their time, but when personal bias or greed is involved, the lines between governance and harassment blur. For example, an HOA may insist on removing a structure or business not because it violates clear standards, but because it conflicts with the preferences of a small but powerful group. This is a misuse of collective authority that undermines the democratic principles HOAs are supposed to embody. When an HOA board decides that its role is to dictate rather than serve, the entire foundation of community representation is compromised. Abuse of power often escalates because homeowners may not fully understand their rights, or they assume the board has unlimited authority. In reality, HOA power is bound by state laws, governing documents, and ethical obligations. However, without education and vigilance, homeowners can easily become victims of an HOA board that acts more like a private regime than a community service body. Financial misuse is another major area where HOA abuse becomes evident. The association collects dues and fees with the understanding that those funds will be allocated for maintenance, improvements, and community needs. Yet, without transparency, funds can be diverted, mismanaged, or used for personal benefit. Homeowners may find themselves paying for projects that never materialize or footing the bill for expenses that serve no community purpose. This lack of accountability turns financial management into a tool of power rather than service, allowing board members to pressure homeowners into compliance by threatening fees, liens, or other penalties. Such misuse is often hidden in plain sight, disguised under vague budget lines or undisclosed expenditures. This makes it all the more critical for residents to demand access to records, audits, and financial reports, which are usually guaranteed by law. Beyond financial and regulatory overreach, HOA power abuse can have deeply personal consequences. Homeowners may feel isolated, unfairly targeted, or stripped of their sense of security in their own property. The psychological toll of being harassed or threatened by an organization meant to protect the community cannot be understated. It erodes trust, divides neighbors, and fosters hostility where cooperation should exist. In the most extreme cases, as with the cabin resort story, abuse of power can escalate into outright criminal behavior, where intimidation and destruction replace civil negotiation. What makes this so damaging is the betrayal of trust. Residents contribute to the HOA under the assumption of fairness and responsibility, yet they are repaid with manipulation and coercion. The educational takeaway is that abuse of power within HOAs thrives in silence and ignorance. The best safeguard is knowledge, knowing your rights as a homeowner, understanding the governing documents, and recognizing when authority is being misused. Homeowners should remember that HOAs are not untouchable. They are accountable organizations bound by legal and ethical obligations. However, without education and vigilance, homeowners can easily become victims of an HOA board that acts more like a private regime than a community service body. The best safeguard is knowledge. Knowing your rights as a homeowner, understanding the governing documents, and recognizing when authority is being misused. Homeowners should remember that HOAs are not untouchable. They are accountable organizations bound by legal and ethical obligations. However, without education and vigilance, homeowners can easily become victims of an HOA board that acts more like a private regime than a community service body.
The importance of saying no in the face of unreasonable or unethical demands cannot be overstated, especially when dealing with organizations or individuals who thrive on control. Many people struggle with the word no because it carries the weight of potential conflict, rejection, or backlash. However, it is precisely this resistance that makes it powerful. Saying no is a form of boundary setting, and without boundaries, people and organizations with authority can overstep until they have taken far more than they are entitled to. In the context of homeowners associations, business dealings, or any community governance, a refusal to comply with unfair demands can be the first step toward exposing larger issues. For example, when a homeowner says no to an unjust fee, an unnecessary rule, or an unreasonable request, it forces the enforcing body to justify its position. If that justification is weak or rooted in personal motives, it reveals the imbalance of power at play. A simple refusal disrupts the assumption that everyone will comply quietly, and it challenges those in authority to act within their legitimate boundaries. What makes no particularly significant in educational terms is that it is not just a rejection, it is an affirmation of principles. To say no is to assert that fairness, legality, or morality matters more than convenience or fear. For individuals in a community setting, saying no communicates to both the authority and other residents that compliance is not automatic, and that questioning rules is a healthy, necessary part of maintaining balance. This is important because unchecked agreement creates fertile ground for abuse. When no one challenges a questionable rule, it becomes precedent. When no one rejects a fee increase or demands financial transparency, misuse of funds goes unnoticed. The willingness to refuse unreasonable requests is what keeps systems accountable and prevents them from sliding into oppression disguised as order. Psychologically, saying no empowers the individual. People often underestimate how much control they retain, even in seemingly lopsided relationships with organizations like HOAs. The truth is that many of these entities depend heavily on the assumption that homeowners will avoid confrontation. Once someone demonstrates the courage to decline, it opens the door for others to follow suit, creating collective resistance. This shift from passive compliance to active questioning is how community movements begin. A single homeowner's no to paying a suspicious fee or removing a perfectly acceptable structure may inspire others to revisit their own frustrations and recognize patterns of overreach. In this sense, the act of refusal is not just personal, but also communal, setting off ripples that can alter the balance of power. On a broader level, saying no teaches others about the importance of critical thinking. It forces both sides to examine the reasoning behind a rule or demand. For the authority figure, it requires them to prove legitimacy, provide evidence, or reconsider their approach. For the individual, it encourages them to research their rights, understand the law, and strengthen their position. In this way, every refusal becomes a form of education, a practical exercise in civic responsibility. This is how communities evolve from being passively governed to being actively engaged in governance. When people refuse to accept unjust practices, they demand a higher standard of leadership and accountability. That dynamic is essential for keeping power balanced, especially in organizations where leadership rotates and is meant to represent the collective good. The most powerful aspect of saying no is that it prevents escalation of compliance into complicity. By refusing early and clearly, individuals avoid being dragged deeper into situations that may later be harder to escape. In the cabin resort example, saying no to the HOA's attempt at control became the turning point. It was not just a personal act of defiance, but a boundary that revealed the HOA's desperation and triggered their reckless overreach. While the retaliation was extreme, it also exposed the corruption they were trying to hide. This demonstrates that no is not just about stopping something, it is about revealing what lies beneath the surface. It disrupts the illusion of control that abusers rely on and shines a light on the lengths they are willing to go when challenged. Ultimately, saying no is an act of courage that protects not only the individual, but the integrity of the entire community. It is a reminder that authority, no matter how intimidating, is not absolute. People have the right to refuse, to question, and to stand firm when demands cross into unfair or unethical territory. In a society where compliance is often mistaken for harmony, the refusal to comply becomes a catalyst for truth and accountability. By teaching ourselves and others the value of saying no, we create stronger, more resilient communities where power serves the people rather than suppresses them.
Transparency is one of the most powerful tools in preventing and exposing abuse, especially when it comes to organizations that manage money, property, or rules affecting a community. Transparency ensures that decisions are not made in secrecy, that financial records are accessible, and that the people who are supposed to be served by an organization understand how resources are being managed. Without transparency, even well-intentioned leadership can fall into bad habits, and corrupt leadership can thrive without consequence. This is why open budgets, accessible meeting notes, and regular reporting are so important in community governance. They act as safeguards against misuse of power by making it much harder for individuals or groups to operate unchecked. In homeowners associations, for instance, transparency means that every homeowner has the right to review budgets, meeting minutes, and records of how funds are collected and spent. When this process is ignored or hidden, it should immediately raise concerns because secrecy and accountability cannot coexist. The power of transparency lies not only in preventing wrongdoing, but in creating trust. A community cannot function well if its members believe their dues are being wasted or that decisions are being made for the benefit of a select few. When finances and rules are open to scrutiny, people feel more secure knowing that they can see how their money is being used and how decisions are made. This openness discourages corruption because it signals that leadership is accountable and that anyone can ask questions without fear. The simple act of publishing clear, accessible budgets and meeting notes can change the entire atmosphere of a community from one of suspicion to
to one of cooperation. Transparency also removes the mystery that often surrounds authority. When leadership explains decisions openly and shares supporting evidence, it shifts the relationship from one of control to one of partnership. In educational terms, transparency serves as both a preventative and corrective mechanism. Preventatively, it deters leaders from taking liberties with funds or rules, knowing that every action can be examined. Correctively, it allows communities to identify problems early and take action before they grow worse. For example, if homeowners review a budget and notice unusual expenses, they can ask for clarification, request audits, or even vote to replace board members if necessary. This proactive involvement keeps the balance of power where it belongs, with the community. Without this access, small problems often snowball into scandals that harm everyone involved. It is not uncommon for communities that lack transparency to eventually face lawsuits, financial collapse, or bitter conflicts that destroy unity. Another dimension of transparency's power is how it educates and empowers individuals. Many homeowners may not fully understand how their association operates until they see the financials for themselves. Access to budgets and decision-making processes teaches them about priorities, obligations, and potential red flags. This knowledge allows them to participate more meaningfully in community discussions, ask informed questions, and make better decisions when voting on board members or policies. A transparent system encourages not just oversight, but active citizenship, where members of the community understand that their role is not passive, but participatory. The cabin resort story is a clear illustration of this principle. When the resort owner demanded access to the HOA's budget, the leadership could no longer hide their actions behind authority alone. By pulling the budget and presenting it publicly, the power dynamic shifted dramatically. The authority that once seemed intimidating suddenly appeared fragile, exposed by its own records. The pale faces of the board members were not just about embarrassment. They reflected the realization that their misuse of funds was no longer hidden. Transparency stripped away the illusion of control, revealing the truth in a way that no argument or confrontation could have accomplished. Paperwork, records, and numbers became stronger evidence than words ever could. Transparency is not just about protecting individuals from abuse, it is also about strengthening the collective. When everyone has access to information, the community operates from a foundation of trust, fairness, and accountability. Decisions become easier to accept, even when they are unpopular, because people know they were made openly and honestly. Transparency does not eliminate conflict, but it ensures that conflicts are based on facts rather than suspicion. This makes resolution possible and prevents the corrosive distrust that secrecy creates. Ultimately, the power of transparency lies in its ability to balance authority with accountability. It ensures that leadership cannot act in darkness, and it provides individuals with the knowledge they need to protect their rights. Communities that value transparency thrive because their members are informed, engaged, and united against misuse of power. In contrast, secrecy breeds corruption, resentment, and collapse. The lesson is simple, but vital. When we demand transparency, we are not just protecting ourselves from abuse, we are building stronger, healthier communities where authority serves rather than dominate.
Loss is often viewed as a purely negative experience, something to be endured or recovered from. But in reality, loss can also be a turning point that creates opportunities for growth, accountability, and transformation. In situations where abuse of power occurs, loss has a unique ability to shift the balance. While those in power may assume that destroying property, imposing fines, or intimidating individuals will silence opposition, what they often fail to realize is that loss can instead become a rallying point. It removes the illusion of stability and forces both the individual and the community to confront what has been hidden beneath the surface. In the case of the cabin resort, the destruction of the property might have appeared at first to be the end of a dream. Yet instead of collapsing under that weight, the owner turned the situation into leverage by using it to expose the corruption of the HOA. The fire became undeniable proof that something was deeply wrong, And combined with the exposure of the HOA's misused budget, it transformed the narrative from personal tragedy into a community-wide reckoning. This principle applies broadly. When an individual suffers loss at the hands of unfair authority, the way they respond determines whether that loss remains a setback or becomes a catalyst. Loss has the power to strip away complacency. It forces individuals to ask deeper questions. Why did this happen? Who benefits from this situation? What does this say about the system that allowed it? In seeking those answers, people often uncover truths they might not have confronted otherwise. That knowledge, once gained, becomes a form of leverage. It can be used to challenge authority, educate others, and inspire collective action. In this sense, loss does not just remove something from us. It provides the raw material for transformation, a spark that can ignite change. The educational value of turning loss into leverage lies in reframing perspective. Many people view setbacks as the end of the road, but history is full of examples where loss was the foundation of resilience. A burned-down business can lead to uncovering corruption in a system. A wrongful fine can lead to a lawsuit that changes the law. Even personal loss can galvanize communities to demand better protections or accountability. By recognizing that every loss contains within it an opportunity for redirection, individuals can move from victimhood to empowerment. This shift in mindset is critical because it transforms helplessness into agency. The same energy that might otherwise be spent mourning or retreating can instead be channeled into uncovering truth, holding others accountable, and creating new possibilities. Leverage itself is about balance, using what seems like a weakness to create strength. In the resort story, the HOA believed that destroying the cabins would eliminate resistance. Instead, it gave the owner undeniable evidence that something larger was at play. This turned into a tool not just for personal defense, but for exposing the HOA's corruption to the broader community. The loss became leverage because it was undeniable and visible, forcing the HOA into a defensive position. In everyday terms, this lesson teaches us that even when we cannot control what has been taken from us, we can control how we use the aftermath. Loss may strip away resources, but it also reveals new angles and strategies. Another important dimension is that leverage gained through loss often resonates more strongly with others. Communities respond to visible injustice, and loss provides that visibility. People may ignore small complaints or subtle signs of corruption, but when loss becomes evident, such as a burned property, a wrongful foreclosure, or an unfair penalty, it awakens empathy and solidarity. In this way, the individual's loss becomes a collective concern, and that collective energy is a powerful form of leverage. It transforms private pain into public momentum. Ultimately, turning loss into leverage is about refusing to let destruction be the final word. It is about reinterpreting the meaning of what happened and recognizing that even in the ashes, there is evidence, clarity, and the possibility of a stronger future. Loss forces us to confront systems that may have been invisible or ignored, and it provides the proof needed to rally others to demand accountability. Instead of letting those in power use loss as a tool of control, individuals can flip the script and make it the very tool that dismantles corruption. The resort fire was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of exposing the truth.